increase that you...
The VAT increase
just let me finish the point. Just let me finish the point. The VAT increase that you voted for and you put through, you specifically campaigned against before the last election. No wonder the public are sick and tired of politicians coming along, saying one thing before election and then doing the absolute opposite. Don't you think you should apologise for saying that you wouldn't increase VAT and then you came along and did it?
We went into government to turn the economy round and put the public finances on a sound footing, and that is what has happened. Gordon Brown was putting the end to boom and bust. Did he apologise for that when he presided over the biggest biggest bust we've seen in 100 years?
But if we look at the Lib Dem position, because Chris Leslie says before the 2010 campaign you did campaign against a VAT rise. Indeed, you accused the Tories of doing one. You promptly then joined with the Tories in voting for one. You pledged to abolish tuition fees. I think we know where that went. Your leader, Mr Clegg, warned against, quote, slamming on the brakes when the economy is barely growing. You then signed off on the Tory austerity programme. I mean, why should we listen to you on anything you have to say in the economy?
Well, we didn't slam on the brakes, actually. The government didn't slam on the brakes, and that's why we carried on having economic growth through every year of this Parliament. If we were in a position to have an overall majority, we wouldn't have to make any compromises. It's a question you need to put to both Labour and the Conservatives, given that neither of them are going to win a majority, as to which of their policies they are putting on the table for any post-election negotiation.
Newby, you're campaigning to try and win trust back on this platform of being the fiscally responsible party, and you published in your manifesto a sort of detailed costing of your policies, and you endeavoured to show where the money was coming from. But £7 billion, the biggest chunk of money, is coming from unspecified crackdowns on tax evasion and tax avoidance. Again, this is funny money, isn't it? You're no better than any of the others. You're just plucking £7 billion out of the air.
No. Because we've generated billions from tax avoidance measures in this Parliament, and it isn't as though there is no... Incidentally, Chris, the Labour Party is banking this kind of increase in revenue as much as anybody else.
No, we're not.
We're in the middle of an OECD process to tax companies fairly, who at the moment are shifting their profits around the world, and the Googles and the Starbucks of this world. This is an international approach.
If these proposals, I mean, this is also a problem, frankly, for the Conservatives, who are also counting on billions and billions from cracking down on tax evasion and avoidance. If these numbers were credible, they would have been written into the OBR forecast, and they absolutely weren't. They were specifically not written into the OBR forecast, which means you don't have a clue where the money's coming from.
Well, can I just come back on that? Because, again, I've been the tax minister for the last 5 years, and over that time, it depends how one looks at it, we would say we've found £7 billion from tax avoidance and tax evasion measures. Another way of looking at it is to look at the yield that HMRC has brought in. That's gone up from £17 billion to £26 billion.
But you've done the easy stuff. Where is this other stuff?
It doesn't always work. I mean, Dick's right that there's the OECD work that's going on at looking at multinationals. There is still scope to take further action. Every year we've made HMRC much more effective and efficient in terms of dealing with tax avoidance and tax evasion. Well, when it comes to dealing with non-DOMs, we've substantially increased the fees.
Why don't you scrap it?
George Osborne's proposal in 27, we've expanded that. And when it comes to looking at abuses of the system, we would certainly look at the non-DOM rules. But as I say, we're bringing in money from non-DOMs in a way that hasn't happened in the past.
Let me come back to Patrick.
Can I just say that Chris Leslie has a real nerve here. Your outgoing Chief Secretary left a note saying there's no money. You welcome the rise in the personal allowance, but then you don't explain how you'd have covered it. You attack the rise in VAT, you haven't identified your own spending cuts, so you would have gone on with unfunded spending, loading onto the deficit. You can't take the moral high ground here, Chris, and really Labour is giving the impression you haven't learnt your lessons. You spend too much money, you call yourself Keynesians, but Keynes believed in the good years you should be running a surplus, and Labour hasn't learned that.
Listen, Patrick, I'll offer the hand of friendship back in response to that. You, I would have hoped, would agree that when the viewers watch all of the parties, they look at what we're proposing coming forward, that actually all of our proposals in all of our manifestos really ought to be independently costed,
and ours are,
properly
and yours
verified. We said that the Office of Budget Responsibility should be allowed
we did
to
something
properly
about it,
audit
Chris.
and verify all of those.
Well,
But
you
you
did.
know,
Let me come back to
that
Patrick
David Gauke
O'Flynn.
would prevented that, stopped the OBR from having that. Now, it would have been a good thing, wouldn't
All
it?
right.
To have the OBR to
So
do that.
Patrick O'Flynn, let me just get this right. You would broadly back Tory deficit reduction plans. That's what you've said.
Yes.
That's what your manifesto implies. You want a referendum, which is
We
what
do.
the Tory party wants too. So if you believe both these things, why don't you just vote for the real thing instead of UKIP?
I don't think David Cameron is the real thing. He's trying to impersonate UKIP positions now after
Well, you're
abandoning...
impersonating Tory deficit reduction.
No, after abandoning almost every position that brought him to prominence. We believe UKIP MPs are needed in numbers in the next Parliament to hold the feet to the fire of the next Chancellor on deficit reduction and to ensure that a full, free and fair referendum on EU membership is swiftly delivered.
All right. Chris Leslie, why the Lib Dems and the Conservatives have agreed that they will have to find the funding. They will find the funding for the extra $8 billion that the NHS is going to need in extra spending by the end of this decade. Why won't you?
Well, we'd love to. I'd love to promise all sorts of things in the future, but you know that the public won't believe funny money promises that are based on thin air. We've said, as a first step, our $2.5 billion time to care fund with 20,000 extra nurses, 8,000 extra doctors is important. Now, we've had to make difficult decisions, and we've had these conversations before. The mansion tax on properties over £2 million is part of paying for that. Now, we've taken a lot.
We have no details.
Yes, but we've taken the decision to say how we would pay for it.
But hang on a second. Hang on a second. On the mansion tax, you've said, your leader has said that the mansion tax is coming in a few weeks after the election. You've told, which is, you know, no time at all. Well, yet you haven't even done the work to allow the electorate an understanding of how it would work.
Of course,
how are you going to raise the money in 3 weeks from the election if you can't tell us how it's going to work?
We would have to, of course, legislate to implement the mansion tax proposal.
But you're saying you're going to do it immediately, so give us the detail now.
OK, the detail is Danny Alexander has said that £1.2 billion can be raised through a mansion tax. That's the modelling and analysis from HMRC. And obviously, when we get into government, we'll pick up on that HMRC analysis and make sure that we implement it.
So you can't tell us what the mansion tax rate will be.
Well,
and you're basically depending on Lib Dem work. You're trusting that the Lib Dems have done their homework on this.
HMRC, well, if you're thinking they're liars, I don't know. But I think...
So what will the rate be?
Well, we've said that for those properties where it's over £2 million, we've said the first band £2 million to £3 million, it'd be about £250 a month. And we can set that out. Now, we've got to make sure we get hold of this HMRC analysis. But I have to tell you,
so you haven't got it yet?
We need to raise the money for the NHS.
No, we know that, but you can't tell us why.
Don't just dismiss that.
There's no way you can bring it in this year. There's no way that you
If we legislate for it, of course we can bring it in. Start the process off within this financial year.
Can I ask a wider question? Given that the NHS believes there'll be an £8 billion gap by the end of 2020, is this £2.5 billion that you're promising to increase quickly, is that a down payment on the £8 billion, or is it separate from the $8 billion?
It's a down payment towards that, and I think it's important that
that's not what the health minister told us.
As I say, look, I would love, it'd be the easiest thing in the world to say here, yeah, I'm going to give you 10 billion of tax cuts, we're going to give you 8 billion of NHS. The public are fed up of politicians doing that, and we've taken the flak on how we pay for these things, but it's important that we do that because ultimately, if we don't fully fund every single policy, the public will lose faith, and that's why we are distinctive, I think, in this election.
Don't you think the HMRC needs the £8 billion, which Simon Stevens has identified?
Tell us for the fifth time. Where would it come from?
Simon Stevens has clearly identified a plan. It requires the £8 billion. As a government, we've got a record of finding that type of money, and we will do that. The only place we're spending on the NHS that's been cut, Chris, as you well know, is Wales, where there's a Labour administration.
I think you're blushing a little bit, David. You really ought to feel very embarrassed that you can't say how you would pay for health.
We haven't heard from Stewart Hosie.
This is actually the problem. When you have a series of parties wedded to 30 billion of cuts, we all want to find the 9.5 billion real terms increase that the Stevens report said. We have laid out to do that within the spending envelope of the 0.5% real terms increase. It would make so much more sense, instead of planning for cuts without seeing where the axe will fall, that we had a sensible, modest increase in public expenditure to actually fund the NHS and our other vital services properly.
David Gauke, I've got a final question for you. Your leader, Mr Cameron, has promised that the next Conservative government, if we have one, will create 2 million new jobs. You'll create 2 million new jobs. It's the kind of thing leaders of the Soviet Union used to say. I'd just like to point out the Soviet Union wasn't a success. You have no idea whether you can create 2 million jobs or not. In fact, you don't create any jobs.
Well, it's businesses, it's employers that create jobs.
So you just made the figure up, didn't you?
But what government can do, as we have done over the last 5 years, is put in place the conditions to create jobs.
But how do you know there'll be 2 million?
That means having the tax policies to incentivise work.
I understand all that, but where does the 2 million figure come from?
Bringing regulations down.
Where does the 2 million figure come from, other than in David Cameron's head?
It will come from employers, businesses, small businesses, medium-sized businesses and large businesses. If we put in place the policies that help job creation, we've done it for 5 years, we'll do it for the next 5 years.
OK, time now for our three parties to make their final pitches to you on why their party has the best policies on the economy. They've just got 30 seconds, and we're going to do it in reverse order from where they are at the moment. So we'll go to Stewart Hosie first.
Thank you very much indeed. We've just seen and heard from a whole number of political parties, all of which want to cut 30 billion from the budget, but not one of whom can tell you where the axe will fall. We don't need more cuts. We don't need and we can't afford more austerity. Instead, let's rebalance the economy, tackle the debt and the deficit properly, spend a modest amount to lift the squeeze from ordinary people, and properly fund the NHS and our other vital public services.
Thank you. Patrick O'Flynn.
UKIP can say where the axe will fall. We will put the British people first. We will cut spending very significantly on foreign aid, on EU contributions, on the HS2 vanity project, and on the money going over the border to Scotland. We will put the British people first, put tax cuts through to put money back in their pockets. UKIP is the one party here who's got a fully costed and verified and funded plan to improve your living standards and get the books back into balance.
Thank you. David Gauke.
In 2 weeks' time, you have a clear choice. Sticking with the plan that is delivering a brighter future, a plan that's delivering 1,000 new jobs a day, a plan that's dealing with our debts and protecting the NHS, a plan that is rewarding a hard day's work with lower taxes. Or you can have the chaos of the SNP propping up Ed Miliband, just delivering more debt, more borrowing, more taxes. I say stick to the plan and vote Conservative on the 7th of May.
Thank you. Dig Newby.
This discussion's highlighted the stark choices we face on the economy. Labour are promising responsibility, but not yet, and who knows when. The Conservatives are offering a combination of eye-watering further expenditure cuts and unfunded tax cuts and spending commitments. Only the Liberal Democrats combined a measured elimination of the deficit with protections for health and education and increased funding to meet the long-term needs of the country's economy. A stronger economy and a fairer society.
Thank you. Chris Leslie.
After 5 years of wages not keeping pace with bills, we need a different approach, not an ideological crusade to shrink public investment and have extreme cuts under the Tories, but we need to really build those strong economic foundations, balance the books. None of our pledges involve additional borrowing. Raising living standards for the majority is the key to success, because we understand that an economy that works is one that puts working people first.
Thank you. And that's all for today's debate. My thanks to all of our guests and, of course, to Robert Peston for being with us. Tomorrow, it's the turn of education. I'll be joined by Education Secretary Nick Morgan, Shadow Education Secretary Tristram Hunt, David Laws for the Lib Dems, and representatives from the Greens and UKIP, and by the BBC's education editor, Branwen Jeffries, just to keep them honest. Plus, don't forget, the Daily Politics Election Special is back as it is every weekday, tomorrow at midday. From all of us here, goodbye.